everyone, I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. My goal here is to help us all connect, inspire, and create. We cover different photography topics, and a guest speaker is here every Wednesday to share their photography and experiences behind the lens. They'll share their stories and expertise to inspire you to create better images and improve your own photography portfolio. A list of upcoming presentations can be found on my website at lindanickell.com. And under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to my YouTube channel and our community blog. Erin Randall is the lady that pushes all the buttons, sometimes mine, but she does keep things running smoothly for us. You can connect with her at admilyoracoaching.com. Say hello, Erin.
I'm afraid to. I'm afraid it might press a button.
You know what? If anybody can, it's you, and it's okay. Yeah. In previous sessions, our friend Jose Madrigal has presented two different sessions for us. The first one was called Pollinators, Magnified Macro Photography, and he showed us how he post-processes his images and finishing touches, which was his most recent presentation. He's here tonight to share some news about what he's been up to. So I'm going to pass the little microphone or speaker to you, Mr. Madrigal. Tell us what you're up to, and tell us how much you miss us.
All right. Yeah, I miss you guys tremendously. Work has been nuts, as I was talking with you about earlier, but I definitely love getting on here whenever I can. I think part of why work is nuts is because I don't know how to say no to anything ever. And so I just keep adding more to the plate. But I'm trying to manage several things at once. And so one of the things that I've got going on now that you're alluding to, and that some of you guys have already signed up for, is I'm doing my first in-person workshop. I'm doing a workshop on May 29th. That's Saturday, the last Saturday of the month. It's Memorial Day weekend. So it hopefully will be an easy weekend for you guys to have some time off and be able to come to it. I have a private ranch, and I call it a ranch, but that's a bit of a misnomer because it's not like a working ranch. There's no cows there. There is a metal shed barn building, but it's not housing anything other than stuff that we keep out there, lawnmowers and things like that. But at any rate, my wife and I have, over the last 7 years that we've owned it, have really dedicated ourselves to letting it become as wild and natural as possible for pollinators, because you guys know I love to photograph pollinators. And so we've also added wildflowers and to the place, seeding the property. And so there's a lot of stuff there. We've added a pond. It's a pretty large sized pond. I would say probably about 75 feet wide by about 150 feet long. So it's a pretty good large sized pond, but not so big that it's hard to get around. It's real easy to photograph the dragonflies. And so my workshop is going to be, as you guys know, one of the things that I'm known for is capturing insects in flight. And that's the thing that I get asked about the most on my Instagram, is how do you do that? And so I'm going to show you guys how I do that through a live workshop. There's nothing like seeing it in person and having me be able to tell you, here's a moment. This is the type of thing that I look for. This is the type of moment that you should be looking for. And here's the opportunities. These are the types of flowers that you can find bees on. These are the types of situations you can find dragonflies. So it's a 6-hour workshop starting at 7 a.m. We'll want to start early to be able to capture the bees first. For the first 3 hours, we'll spend about 15 to 30 minutes going over settings, going over tips and techniques. And then the next couple of hours, I'm basically just going to be at your disposal as you practice photographing. If after a little while you decide that you get distracted by something else there that you see that grabs your attention, you're free to roam until at the halfway point, where we'll stop, we'll have snacks, and then we'll start the second half, which is we'll go over to the pond and do some dragonfly photography. It's the perfect time of year to do it because there's certain flowers that really give me the best kind of behavior out of bees that I look for. So you guys will learn that. And then also dragonflies are fully, there's tons of them at that time of year. So it's really a great time of year to do it. The location is near Caldwell, Texas, which is about 15 to 20 miles west of Bryan College Station. So it's very centrally located. If you're in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, or Houston, sorry, I'm going long. But it's that's the type of stuff that you're going to learn. If you have, I do recommend you bring a telephoto lens. I've actually got a whole spiel that I'm going to stop going through because I can email it to you if you're interested. But I would love to see you guys there. I think, like I said, 4 or 5 of you guys have already signed up, and it would be great if we have a good group of maybe about 10 to 12. I'd probably cap it at about 15 so that it's not overwhelming, and I can give good attention to each person that's there. If you're interested, email me at jose@jmadimages.com, and that's I texted that on there in the chat. Also, we're giving away one spot. The price is $129, but the early bird price is $109. But for all of you wonderful people that tune in to the Happiness Hour, I'm taking another $20 off of the early bird price, so it'll just be $89. And like I said, we're giving away one entry tonight, so one lucky person is going to get to attend for free. Those of you that have already paid, if you end up being the winner, I'll refund you about $5. No, I'm kidding. I'll refund the full amount and make sure that you get your free spot. All right, but hopefully a bunch of you will want to come out, and it's going to be a fun time. I think, like I said, because most of the people know each other, and you know, it's a great place for doing the type of thing that I do. So if you've ever been curious about how I do it and trying to learn some of the techniques, you're going to learn a lot that day.
Can you tell us the date again, Jose?
Yes, Saturday, May 29th. It's the Saturday before Memorial Day, the last Saturday of the month. I know this has already come up. There are a couple of RV parks very close. So if you have an RV or camper trailer or something like that, you can find Google RV parks near Caldwell, and most of those are going to be within a 10-minute drive of where I'm at. I'm not going to put out the exact location here where we're being recorded, but I'll email you that info specifically later, the exact address. And then, like I said, send you an invoice as well if you're interested in signing up.
Sounds good. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here that weekend. Otherwise, I would be right up there with maybe the first person to sign up. But I'm hoping that you have great success, that you are going to be willing to do it again, so that I can attend. All right. We are going to give a free workshop away, but I'm going to make you sit through Rusty's presentation first. So do not leave until we do that. Okay. Rusty, thank you for being patient and letting us do that announcement. Okay. Tonight, our guest is Rusty Myers, who's joining us from Austin. Rusty is a photography instructor whose interest in wildlife led him into teaching classes at his local photography store. In tonight's presentation, Tricks to Using Flash in Wildlife Photography, Rusty will discuss the basics of using a flash for outdoors that will be useful for general photography. He'll cover equipment and settings, and then he'll take a deeper dive into teaching you how to use those techniques to enhance your wildlife shots. With Rusty's tips, your images will look more natural even while using artificial light. This is Rusty's second presentation for us. He was here back in the fall in a presentation called Everything You Need to Know About Bird Photography. And you can find that session on the YouTube channel. So welcome back to the Happiness Hour, Rusty.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's good to see you. And let's just start with, I know how hectic your work life has been the last couple of months. And I'm just great. I was just waiting any minute now waiting for you to say, can we reschedule? And I'm tickled that you didn't ask for that, but I would have given it to you and I would have completely understood. I know, it was close. All right. So, I know you personally, and a few of the people here were here for your first session, but for those that don't know you and that are going to catch this on the YouTube channel, why don't you just give us a little bit background of how you got started and how What makes you shoot wildlife so much? What gets you there?
So my start in photography was young. Dad, when I was in high school, he would shoot weddings, kind of like we'd all love to do, just as a side gig to pay for the hobby.
Mhm.
I think, which gave him some freedom in it not being a business. So he wasn't always doing it. But he got me as a 15, 16 years old shooting film because, I'm a little gray, as his second shooter at weddings. And somehow just picking up on what's going on, during a wedding reception, who's doing what and stuff, almost translates slightly into wildlife photography, because you're quickly trying to pick up on what's this animal going to do, this bird, the deer, the whatever you're looking at, and you start learning what's going on. And I took honestly, by the time I got married, I wasn't taking pictures anymore until we had kids. And so a little bit of film then, and that was a very early digital age. And then somewhere along the way, digital cameras got good, digital DSLRs got affordable, and made the move into that. And kids got older and I had more free time, and it just kept snowballing. And my friend Scott, who's not on here, got me shooting some triathlons with him. So I got into doing some sports sort of stuff, and I started dragging him along on bird photography trips and stuff. And that's how I met Linda, because he and Linda knew each other, and he invited her along to show up on one of our trips. And that's where kind of, I think Linda learned that I just by nature tend to explain what I'm doing. And it's not so much I go, you got to do it this way. It's like, have you thought of trying, or do you realize that this is, and then I just kind of let it all happen. So that's a little background on photography for me.
I appreciate that little intro, because I know some of that backstory, but the other people don't. And I find it, before people start talking, I like that. Keep you on camera, get a feel for who you are as a person and how you became the photographer you are. So I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so this has been one of those topics that is pretty, you get people on one side of the lens that say no to flash, and then the other part group of people are saying, oh yeah, flash is great, it's going to show you a lot of details. We're talking specifically for wildlife, so I'm looking forward to seeing if you can persuade me to run out and get a flash. You ready to get started?
Yes, I am. Okay. All right, so now if you're watching this on a 2-screen computer, you can actually see my presentation. We'll show on one, and you'll have the image over here of the grid with everybody, and you see my hands waving as I'm talking. I'm not trying to get your attention. It's just, that's part of my vocabulary. And so as we get into this, and I haven't started sharing yet, so you're not missing anything. But as we start getting into this, Flash can be a very technical thing, and I don't want to do that, but there are going to be some basics I'm going to cover, and I'm going to try and keep them as simple as possible.
Okay.
And
he's doing that for my benefit, because he's been out shooting with me. He knows to keep it simple.
Okay, so are we seeing the presentation?
We are. Yeah.
So I've got in here my original title, but it was rejected by the management. But I had to stick it in there, Linda. Sorry. Oops. I'm on.
Right. You got dinged for not doing what you're supposed to do.
I had the wrong application active. Tried to skip through. Here's my contact information. I think Linda's got that in all the meeting information also. But feel free to ask me questions. Hit me up on Instagram. And I mentioned in chat, some of the pictures are in a gallery that I've got online. So as we go through here, you'll see I've got multiple pictures on some of the slides. And if you want to see them closer, feel free to go to the gallery. Unfortunately, not all of them are captioned, but I think it'll be pretty obvious what they are. So what we're going to cover here is when and why to use a flash. And I guess I should have said how. That would be important. And I'm going to try and quickly go over some terminology. I'm going to talk a little bit about gear, and then we'll go into camera and flash settings, and then we're going to look at some silly pictures that demonstrate what I am trying to show you. And like anything in photography, there's not necessarily a right way and a wrong way. You're going to, if you give this a try, you're going to play with it, and you're going to develop your own sort of style of how it goes. And so this is always just a kickoff spot. Hopefully this gets you interested in using it. So why would you use a flash? Well, you want to get light on the subject. Now, typically, in most of my, I think all my examples in here are going to be birds. A lot of times you're trying to get fill light. So if the bird's not in flight, so it's perched somewhere, a feeder, a perch near a feeder. A lot of times it's under a tree, or they land a little out of sight. You're rearranging yourself to get that bird in view, and you've got a lot of light hitting the tree, or on the background behind the tree, behind the perch, but not on the bird. And so that's a great way to use a flash to fill in on the bird. And I know one of the side effects is, if you get good lighting on the subject with the flash, good clean light, you can be working at a lower ISO than you would be if you had to do everything without a flash, because you'd be boosting the ISO, your background would be blown out a little bit, but you'd end up with more noise in the shadows, and this gives you a little cleaner image. But the other reason you'd be doing it is basically to stop action. You freeze motion of a bird. And we're kind of going some of the different ways of doing that. And then kind of in the when category, I really discourage shooting using a flash at night. Just because the animals, and particularly the birds that are out at night, use their eyesight for hunting. And I will talk a lot about some ways to minimize how much the flash will bother an animal, but it can bother their eyesight for up to 30 minutes. And, they've got windows when their best hunting is. And if you're out there, blasting them, that's not good. Now, on the other hand, I have a screech owl nest in my yard, and they quite often are out. I was out taking pictures before 6 today of one of them in the house. The house is partially covered by branches. I could have gone out there with a flash and just gone a low power and kind of filled in on them. Their eyes are open, it's daylight, it's not an issue. So it's kind of, think about the lighting, what sort of animal you're taking pictures of, and how they're going to react. Okay. So quick camera turns, simple things, shutter speed. And as photographers, we ought to be pretty familiar with that, but it's measured in fractions of a second, how long the shutter's open and lets light in. And typically in a regular situation, you're relying on shutter speed to stop motion. And then your aperture, or f-stop, is the size of the opening of the lens, which typical photography affects the depth of field. It does affect the amount of light that comes in while the shutter's open also. ISO or ISO, I use both, is basically the amplification of sensor data. So you've got a sensor that gets data in, and think of it like a radio. When you turn up the radio too loud and the speakers start to distort, that's kind of what happens when you've got your ISO too loud. You're trying to boost the signal that's coming in from the radio beyond the quality of the signal that's coming in. Okay. I might have confused you, but hopefully that gives you an analogy that might help. And then another term is ambient light. So that's basically the light that's in your picture that isn't provided by the flash. And I'll be using that term a lot. All right, so flash, you know, you've probably heard all these terms: flash, strobe, speed light. Typically, your strobe is your in-studio sort of thing. A lot of times it's plugged into a wall outlet, but it's typically a big, high-powered light, really fast recycle time. The speed light is generally what we refer to as what ends up on top of your camera. For those of you that can still see me, I'm holding one up. The rest of you are stuck on the presentation. But in general, I'll use flash just to mean either category. And if you have a big strobe that's battery powered, there's no reason why you can't set it up near a perch that's near your bird feeder and use it. On-camera flash is when the camera is on the camera, and that's either using the built-in flash that's on your camera or a speed light that's in the hot shoe. And an off camera would be when you've got the light not attached to the camera, and then you've got a remote control, commonly called a trigger, on the camera, and it fires off the flash or multiple flashes. And then there's also continuous light, and I only mention that just so that you realize that a flash provides light for a short period of time. The continuous light is always on. And I have actually seen some people that do some interesting owl photography with continuous light. And they'll set up a perch near where an owl will hunt in a field, and they'll put two medium power LED panels aiming at the perch without the owl being there. And if the owl comes, then you know that it's comfortable with the light. You're not flashing it and ruining its night vision. It's in control of the light situation. So that's one of the areas that continuous light can help. But it's always on. Its strobe action will not stop motion. It only will provide light on the subject. Okay. Another term is high-speed sync. And normally when you're taking flash pictures, your camera will have a standard synchronization speed that it will sync up with the camera, and I'll talk about it more. But high-speed sync is a method to allow you to go to higher shutter speeds. And then flash duration is how long the burst of light from the flash exists. And what's interesting is the lower the power setting on the flash, the shorter that duration is. And we can use that to our advantage. And then TTL, in reference to flash, is actually a through the lens metering. And it's a method of the camera and the flash talking to each other right in the very instant you're taking a shot and deciding how much power the flash should apply. So it's almost kind of like an automatic setting on the flash. And then something important to understand is the difference between hard light and soft light. And in general, what it boils down to is the type of shadows you have. So a very soft light is very big in relation to the subject. And creates very soft light. It fills all the curves and the cracks and the crevices, you know, in around the feathers, around the eyes. If you look at animals, into the ears, around it. Whereas a hard light, or a light that's very far away, gives you a lot of contrast. And so sometimes you want one or the other, and so it just kind of depends on how you set up the camera, and you can adjust that either by having the light closer to the subject or bigger in relation to the subject. So in a big soft box or something that diffuses the light. Okay, so those are the big terms. Oh, except for the inverse square law. See, if you get on YouTube and you start watching people talk about using a flash, they'll talk about the inverse square law, and anybody who starts thinking about math and photography just kind of sometimes checks out. So don't overthink it. Basically, it's just telling you that the further you get away from the light source, the light drops off. It's not as bright. And because of the way it is, it drops off very quickly. So this chart kind of shows you that, let's say you're 1 yard, at 1 yard, the light is at full intensity, 100%. If you double that distance, which means 2 yards, it's actually dropped to 25%. So that's how quick the fall off is. And you don't need to know those ratios. Just look at the line, and you look out here by 8, or your increment of 8. If you were at full power at 1, look at 6, 7, and 8. They're almost the same amount of light hitting it way out there. So when your subject is 7 feet out or 7 yards, and the background is at 8, guess what? They're going to get the same amount of light on it. Whereas if your subject's at 1 foot and the background's at 2 foot, or 1 yard and 2 yards, there's going to be a lot more light on the subject than there is going to be on the background, because it drops off. So that's an advantage to moving the light source closer when you shoot. So that's the advantage to using a remote trigger and just sticking the light out by where you're going to take a picture. And I guess now we're getting into it. So speed light on camera. The speed light is specific to the particular brand of camera. So Nikon makes flashes, speed lights for Nikon cameras. Canon makes them for Canon cameras. Sony makes them for Sony. Now, some other manufacturers make them, like, and I mentioned Godox. Godox is sold around the world under many names. Here in the US, you can find it under Godox or Flashpoint. If you're buying from Adorama, it's going to be called Flashpoint. But you would buy that flash for your particular camera, because it's going to mount on the hot shoe and it has to talk to it the right way. Yongnuo, another overseas company, Asian, also make some decent stuff. And so those are the discount too. The camera brand ones will be fairly expensive, as will Pro Photo, but they will also be very, very good. And then for off camera, what's nice about them is they're fairly generic, but the trigger or the remote control you use to fire them would be camera specific. So you would buy a generic strobe to mount out by your perch, but you would have a Canon specific trigger with you. And in fact, I have a friend that has the Nikon trigger and I have the Canon one, and we can actually configure them both the same way and be shooting together, not at the same instant, but together, triggering the same flash. We can just sit there and take turns back and forth. And similar sort of range, the Godox Flashpoints, Westcott, Profoto, and Ellen Chrome. There are just a lot of companies that will do lights. And then modifiers. A softbox is what we've all seen when we've, even if you haven't had a portrait taken recently, but if you remember your school photos, a lot of times there was this big umbrella sort of thing that they were shooting that diffuses the light. That's what softboxes do. Another light modifier is the better beamer, and it's something that would strap onto a speed light on your camera, or if you mount it remotely. And it focuses the beam of light coming out of your flash to get it out on the target. So you don't have to have that flash as close. And the MagMod mag beam does essentially the same sort of thing, but it attaches magnetically. One advantage to it is you can actually put gels into it quite easily. So you can simulate golden hour if you want to. But the advantage of those two products is you get to keep the flash on the camera. So if you're walking around now trying to be mobile, that's the solution. Okay. Whereas, you know, the remote solution, you're sticking something out and hoping the birds are going to land in that spot. Or you're hoping an animal is going to walk through the view where you've got that lined up. And so if you're doing the remote type work, you're going to need some sort of light stand to hold the flash. And I emphasize sandbags because you don't want your light blowing over. That's a good way to break a light. And when I say sandbags, I'm not thinking, you know, I'm not talking about the sandbags you do to stop a dam from breaking, you know, a 50-pound sort of thing. These are smaller nylon pouches that you can fill with gravel or sand, and you lay over the legs of the light stand. And we'll see pictures of that shortly. Okay. And there's one of the things I forgot to mention. So at the far right in this image is one of the MagMod mag beams, and you can see the big lens, and that just snaps over. And right next to it is a speed light. The thing next to it in orange is a battery-powered studio strobe. It's as you can see, it's just a little bit bigger than a flash, but it's more than twice as powerful. And what's next to it are the two different heads it can take. So one of the head on the far left is very similar to a speed light head and a very focused light coming out of it. And the other one spreads the light out. So if you're using it in a softbox, you'd switch to that head. Up by my photography subject there, the owl, that's one of the remote triggers. And then on top of the camera is a neat little gadget from Rogue. It's called their Safari. And if your camera has a hot shoe and the flash is, and it has a pop-up flash, you can put this thing right in the hot shoe and pop up the flash, and it will focus the onboard, the built-in flash, just like this mag beam will, or the better beamer. And it's only about 20 bucks, so it's a nice cheap solution. And then on this page, it's just another view of the speed light and the portable strobes. And then there's this big monster in it. So it's 3 times more powerful than the orange device. And I just happen to have the trigger on the camera. And I had forgotten in the previous picture to include something I like using, which is the mag sphere. And so it pops magnetically onto a speed light or one of those small strobes, and it just diffuses the light. And you'll see an example of how I use that. I find it very generic way of getting light in a little area. My gear list, the speed light that I'm using, I like this particular one. They have a more inexpensive one, but this one uses a rechargeable battery, and it seems to last a lot longer than using the other one that uses 4 AA cells. You can use rechargeable AA's, but this one I can shoot all day. The Godox X Pro trigger is the trigger I use. They have a less expensive trigger that's about $20 less. They both do exactly the same thing. It's just the form factor is a little different. I like this one with the pop-up screen because I see it easier. The orange and the green strobes in there were the Godox 8200s, and I have 2 of those. And the big one was the AD 600. And I don't, there's so many variations of that, I don't mention it, but they're all over 500, going up to 700 or 800. The light stand I use is a ProMaster light stand. I only list that because I've had some cheap ones, and this is an off-brand, but the local Precision Camera carries them, and they're about $40, and they're pretty heavy duty, or that model. The Magmod, it's not a cheap accessory, let me put it that way, but it's very convenient if you do a lot of flash photography. If you're doing weddings and some portrait stuff, it makes it very quick to switch modifiers on the smaller lights and do a lot of stuff. I mentioned the Rogue Safari soft boxes. I tend to buy more inexpensive ones for the ones I'm going to use outside, because the likelihood they're going to blow over and hit the ground is pretty high. So I don't want to spend a lot. I don't mind a heavier one if it's going to last. And the better beamer is about $35. So definitely it's a much more economical solution than the Magmod. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into a little of the settings. Sorry, I just kind of glanced over at the chat to see if anything was sneaking in. So when we're doing fill light, what my goal is always to kind of balance the ambient light and the flash to get a well blended picture. And if you've sat around in your backyard trying to get pictures of the birds on the bird feeder, and the clouds are out, but it's a bright day, it totally will blow out the background, or you get very bright light through the leaves in the tree, and so you get parts of the image that are just too bright if you're exposing to get the subject bright enough. So what you do is you figure out what your settings would be to get the ambient to look good, and then we bring in the flash on the subject to get the subject to look good. And in broad terms, and this is not absolute, because you'll see that I have some bad examples, but in general, your shutter speed is what you use to control what your ambient light looks like. And then you use the aperture to kind of tweak the flash. Honestly, what I tend to do is use the flash power a little more to control the flash, but I will minorly tweak it with the aperture. And you'll see that in the test pictures. But that's kind of important to think about it. And you'll see if you're shooting and you're at a higher shutter speed, you're like, well, why is my background dark? Well, you're not light in the background with the flash, right? And if you're shooting at a fast shutter speed, it's just not collecting the light. So you end up slowing down your shutter speed. And you're probably thinking, well, Rusty, why am I slowing down my shutter speed when I want to stop action too? Because these birds are fast. I'll get to it. But the standard sync speed on most cameras is somewhere between a 200th and a 250th of a second. I think Leicas are down around 1/60th, but in that general area. And when you're using a flash, you're either using it in the TTL mode, and there you've got flash exposure compensation where you can dial in. So if you're doing fill flash, you don't want full power typically. You want less than full power. So you're going to go with -1 or 2 stops on your flash compensation so you don't overexpose the subject. Now, on the other hand, if you're a long ways away and you're using a better beamer or a mag beam, you're probably going to want to bump it up a couple of stops because you're further away with the light, and you're trying to aim and focus that light over a longer distance. Okay. And then the other option is you're going in manual mode. So most cameras, It's just as a percentage. Full power is 1/1. And they go, half power, quarter power. It's essentially you're going down a stop at a time. Down to 128th is typical. A lot of the big strobes will go to a 256th power. Now, the lower that power setting or output setting on the flash, the shorter the flash duration. And that's where the magic starts to happen, because most flashes, when they're at their lowest power, are in the range of between 6 and 8 thousandth of a second, which is really, really fast. If you look at your camera and go spin it up to the fastest shutter speed, most cameras are either 4,000 or 8,000. Okay. So this is how we can use the flash to stop action. Now, high speed sync will let you shoot with faster shutter speeds on your camera to stop action, but by nature, it uses more power. When you take a picture, you have two elements of the shutter that happen, the first curtain and the second curtain. So the first one opens up to expose the sensor, and then it's followed by the second one that covers up the sensor, and then they reset. So at slower shutter speeds, the first one opens, exposes the shutter, and it all the way opens, and then the second one closes. At faster shutter speeds, what happens is the first one starts to open and the second one starts to follow it. And so it only shows a certain part of the sensor, a little band of it. So if you try and shoot, and that's the sync speed is setting of your standard sync speed. So at a 200th or a 250th of a second, that's when your sensor is fully exposed and a normal flash burst would properly hit the sensor, or anything slower than that. Whereas if you're shooting at a 4,000th of a second, you might look at the picture afterwards if you did not turn on high speed sync, and you would just see a bright stripe across your image, and the rest would be dark. And that's because that was where that little window, traveling window of the two curtains was. So what high speed sync does is it actually pulses. It just puts out light for a longer period at a time. So it's putting out light the whole time both curtains are moving across, which is why it uses more power. Which in the flash world, when you use more power, it takes more time to recycle or be ready for the next shot. So that's another advantage to using the lower power to actually freeze action. Okay, time to look at some pictures. So here are two pictures with exactly the same setting, but in one the flash fired and one it didn't. And you can see the background. Oh, sorry, I forgot. This is the time where I give my disclaimer. When Linda asked me to do this, 6 months ago, I had grand plans. I was going to have hummingbird feeders out. I was going to have tons of hummingbirds, and I was going to be sitting out there with a flash, and I was going to get you all sorts of pictures of different angles of hummingbirds, and so I could repeat all the settings and work and weather and no hummingbirds, and all sorts of things have conspired against me. So I have this wonderful little owl ornament, and it holds still and it lets me do everything I want. And you're going to see some really goofy pictures later of how we do motion. But anyway, back to this. So this was done, unfortunately, on a cloudy day. I really wanted to have a sunny day so I could kind of show how everything balances. When you have a cloudy day, it's like having a great big softbox. And everything, all the light is soft and even. But you can see that really all we've got is the flash hitting my subject in the right-hand picture, and the left one, it's not. The rest of the picture is the same. And we've got from ground to sky. So here's some pictures of just some that I did get where I used fill flash. And let's start with the owl in the middle, and look at that eye that that's looking at us. That's the little bright light in there is a little bit of catch light, and that's a clue that either the sun was behind me or I was using some sort of flash. And in this case, it was a small softbox in his general area. But you can see that the underside of the roof by the owl is actually lit up a little bit. Not a lot, because I was only doing fill flash. I just wanted to make sure that I got a nice even exposure on him. And this is taken, I mean, you can see in the background, the part of the tree in the upper left corner. That's ambient light hitting the tree. So that gives you a clue just how bright it actually was. Normally I don't take pictures on the bird feeder, but I was trying to get pictures for this class. And the bottom right-hand corner, I'm using that mag sphere I mentioned. It's about 7 feet from the feeder. And if you look closely, you'll see that the female cardinal's on the perch to the right and the male cardinal's on the bird feeder. And so that's the same setting, flash setting on both those two images. So the female on the left, you can see her, what's behind her is a fence that's in the dark. That's exactly what I got. She's lit up, background's gone. The male cardinal, his background is not as dark, and you can tell there's a little bit of light. Now, what's important is when you look at the male cardinal is the direction of light. It was coming from my everybody's left as we're looking at the bird feeder, which means the shadow that it casts goes off into nowhere. If I had the light at the same angle but on the right, we'd see a big old shadow of the cardinal on the bird feeder. So you want to remember light direction when you're setting up the light. Now with the perch situation, it just, the shadow's gone. It disappears into nothingness. So these are just a couple of setups. Here in the middle, the blue bag on the bottom of the light stand, that's one of the sandbags I was talking about. And that adds 15 pounds, 10 or 15 pounds down low to the middle. And that's a very small soft box. It collapses up like those windshield sunscreens you use in your car. You know, you fold it and you give it a twist and all of a sudden it's a small round disc. So it's real portable and just snaps onto the holder up there with the flash. And you can see that from that distance will light up both the bird feeder and the perch. In the lower left, I've got the Magnified mag beam right next to my camera, aimed at the same bird feeder setup, but this way it's back by me. I can re-aim it a little easier. To the right is actually how I was shooting that scene. So you can see that that light box is right up by the birds and I'm way back, so I'm not bothering them. And a lot of times I'll go out there hours before I'm going to shoot and I'll stick this light out there. So they're used to it by the time I get out there and I'm not close to them. They don't care about me.
Hey, Rusty, there's a question, and I'm not real sure if it's a good time to slip it in, but let me ask, and if it's not, you can pick it up when it is. Alden wanted to know, how far off camera access do you typically position your strobe?
Yeah, so I will say that the vast majority of the time I'm doing off camera. So that means even if I'm right next to the flash, I'm usually at least a foot away. And when we're talking about off axis, if the flash is right on the camera, it's close to the lens and very close to the angle that you're shooting. One of the things that can happen when you're very close to being on axis is red eye. You know, and with animals, a lot of times you get green eye, depending on whether they're predators or prey type animals. But it's just like shooting us. And so if you get it, the light a little off axis, and so a lot of people will have a rig that will have a bar that screws on the bottom of the camera in where your tripod hole is, and it mounts the camera up and over to the side, so it's not as close to being lined up with the lens, and that would be getting it off axis. Okay, hopefully that answered that. But yes, I don't have one of those setups, so when if I've got the camera on, or the flash on the camera body, I'm being very mobile, and usually I'm on the fly. It's kind of like, oh wow, I'm going to need a fill flash, and I just whip it out and go with it. So I probably ought to, but yeah, when I plan ahead, then I'm way remote. Okay. Oh, I saw Gary's comment about stabilizing the light stands, and yes, the tent stakes and stuff. I've actually gone out with a tripod. You've got a lot of times on the tripod, there's a hook where you can like hang something off the bottom of the tripod. I've actually used rope and a tent stake to pull that down if I was leaving the camera outside or using it in really windy situations. Okay. So now back to my fun little test subject here. And this is where the fact I was shooting these pictures, I did a proof of concept pictures 3 months ago, and it was all planning on how I was going to get the perfect shots for this class and what I needed to cover. And because of work situations and others, it was harder to do that. So some of these I was taking yesterday before a storm rolled in, and I got a brief bright period of time and I ran out, but I really wanted a bright sunny day to do this. So the picture on the left, shot at a 30th of a second, handheld, by the way. But I was using a flash, and it tends to stop the motion a little bit. The flash was at its lowest power, same flash power in all these pictures. And you'll see the only thing that changed is you run across here, they're all at f5, all at ISO 400. They were all at a 1/28th power, so the lowest setting on my flash. But I changed the shutter speed. And what changed? The darkness of the background. For the most part, you'll notice that the picture on the left at a 30th of a second, I'm getting a little more ambient light on the subject, and that's mainly because it was not totally in shadow. And so, yes, I was getting some ambient light. And that, but you can see how the background changes. And if you want the background to be less obvious, I would have gone to 2/50th of a second. My that particular camera syncs up to 2/50th, and the background would have gotten even darker, and that test subject would have looked about the same. All right. So this, unfortunately, where my example really breaks down. But here I'm trying to keep the shutter constant and then modify the f-stop to show how it affects the flash. The flash was constant power. So these were all at 60th of a second, and I just changed the f-stop. So I'm down almost 2. So the center shot would be my kind of standard shot, decent light on the subject. The left shot, I've gone to f2.8, so down stop and 2/3, right? No, 2 stops. 2 stops. And there, because of the way the light was, it truly is affecting it, and it's more than just the flash now affecting it. But the picture on the right, shot at f8, you can see now the flash effect on the subject is less. If I were doing this honestly, I would be playing with flash exposure compensation and doing it as TTL. just so I could maintain the background better. Okay. So since I didn't have nice consistent hummingbird wings, I thought, what's the next best thing to show motion consistently? And it's my ceiling fan. Maybe we ought to start a pool to see how long it is before I remember to take the tape off my ceiling fan. But what we're concerned about or want to focus on is the white piece of tape. And starting in the upper right corner, the most blurry picture, this is just ambient light. I've got a bunch of lights turned on in the room, and I'm going from a 1/30th of a second all the way around and just follow it around counterclockwise to an 8,000th of a second is the one that's superimposed. And really, and that's why I shared the link in the chat. If you go way back to the beginning of the chat, you can actually pull these down and look at them and see. But at a 4,000th, it's pretty sharp, pretty close. 8,000th, definitely. It's a very noisy picture. I had to go to the ISO 12,008 to get the image. And then I hopped over and I'm shooting the same picture with a flash in a softbox kind of aimed up. The flash is actually hitting to the left of the picture. So if you look at the picture on the left, that tape is actually stopped. That's where the flash is hitting. But you notice the blades over on the right are moving or look like they're moving. It's because the flash isn't hitting them very much and they've got a lot of ambient light on them. So they're still getting partial ambient and partial flashlight, whereas the tape spot is mostly flash. But in each one of these, that white tape section is acceptably sharp, even at a 1/30th of a second. And that's because it's that short duration of, in the case of this flash, is just a little over 7,000th of a second. And then if we switch over to high speed sync, what I've done is I've had, here are the numbers, and these I actually have captioned. But the picture on the left, the 500th of a second, ISO 100, all these are at f2.8, is at an 1/8th power. So I've gone from a 1/128th power to 1/8th power to get an equivalent exposure. So right there, you can already see I'm using more flash, and it's blurry. Next picture is 1,000th of a second. I've gone to a 1/4 power to maintain exposure, blurry. Next one's 2,000th of a second. That's kind of covered up, but once again, blurry, 1/2 power. The 4,000th, I'm at full power now, and it is almost good enough, but a little blurry. So the superimposed picture's in an 8,000th of a second, but you notice I had to bump the ISO to get the equivalent exposure. Now, I'm not saying this is a perfect exposure. I was trying to maintain consistent through all the pictures. That one is sharp. But at full power, it takes almost 1.5 seconds for that flash. And this is one of the battery-powered studio strobes, the small ones. It takes 1.5 seconds for it to refresh. Whereas at 128th power that I was doing in the other stuff, I can put my camera in fast mode and fire off between 8 and 10 shots sequentially, and it'll fire for every single one of them. It recycles fast enough at that, okay? There are still reasons to do high-speed sync. I'm not trying to sell one or the other, but I just want you to understand that just by switching to high-speed sync doesn't mean you're going to stop action. You're now stopping action with shutter speed instead of flash duration. Okay, and there's just the comparison. 1/30th of a second, we've got a sharp image with short flash duration. High-speed sync on the right, we've got at an 8,000th. Okay. Whoa, that snuck up on me.
Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Why don't you stop sharing your screen? And I'm going to chastise you for a second.
Yeah, not simple enough.
There you go.
I would before you get after me, this honestly is the perfect class to have people in person.
Yeah. Oh,
Because,
absolutely. Absolutely.
it-
One, because it's so technical and you really need to see what that flash does. Yeah, I completely get it. Okay, so that being said, I wanted more pictures and I was like, that little stuffed animal just did not do it for me. But
yeah,
I appreciated the you strapping him to a perch. So I do.
yeah, I did actually go out with my screech owl, but he kind of gave me the stink eye and went back in the house.
Judy is curious. Do you have any experience with LED lights?
So, yes. And what I've done, you guys can see me now, right?
Yep.
So this big beast here has a modeling light that's an LED down the middle. And so what I will do is I have used that outside in the evening with the owls because it's not near as bright as a strobe going off when it does go off, but I can use it as a modeling light in a softbox. And so it's very much like using an LED panel or something like that. And I get some very nice soft light. I still have to shoot higher ISOs, but it's a much gentler sort of light. And the owl sees it and will duck back into the house if he doesn't like it. And since they stay out and they look at me and they listen to me when I talk to them, I figure we're cool. So that's when I've used LED.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions in here. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if you guys have any, you better do it quickly. So, and Alden said this. He said, let me see if I can find it here. He says high-speed sync is important, so important on sunny days where you have to tone down the ambient light. I think you'll agree with that.
Yeah. And it really comes into play when you are intentionally trying to blur the background and you have to go with a wider open f-stop to have that effect. All of a sudden you have to shoot very high shutter speeds. You're forced in high speed sync. And so that's why I say there's a right time for both.
Yeah.
I love the quicker flash duration for hummingbird pictures when I'm sitting there, because I can sit there and just bang off a series 8 or 10 real quick. And with a hummingbird, you catch it at the right angle, all that color just pops. And I'm not even really worried about the wingtips totally stopping, but I get a little more of them frozen and I get the color.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was a very comprehensive beginner intro to Flash and how it can be used and what you can get out of it. I particularly, first of all, I was laughing at your fan example, but it was very, very, it was effective for me because I could see what you were trying to accomplish, and it was really helpful to see the different settings. So, Rusty, I know this was a crazy couple of months for you, and I do appreciate that you came on and did this for us, because what I'm trying to do is create a library of different subjects or topics. And this is definitely, to me, not a sexy topic. Once you started talking about TTL and HSS, I was like over the head. So, but for those people, even myself at some point, because I know you and I sat down and I was kind of going through, I want to buy Flash. What should I do? And you started talking to me about it, and you really got me excited about it. And so now I'm going to have to sit down and kind of understand more of the technical side of it. But this is a great place to start.
I would highly suggest one of the Godoc's Flashpoint ones and a trigger,
Yeah.
because that gets you the on camera and it gets you the off camera, and you don't even have to worry about modifiers at that point. It gets you a start. And I didn't even mention those speed lights actually will zoom. So if you're using up to a 200 millimeter lens, they will zoom to compensate and tighten their beam for up to a 200 millimeter lens.
Okay, great.
So.
Okay. All right, guys, you can find Rusty at sammyersphoto.com. And if you're on Instagram, be sure to give him a follow at Rusty Myers Photo. And I'll be sure to put that information into the show notes. Okay, we're going to, as promised, we're going to bring back Jose for our giveaway. That being said, Mr. Cowan, it looks like you're going to go shoot dragonflies. So I hope that you take good notes, and then you guys can link up with each other afterward. All right.
Ben and I have met up once before here in Houston, so we already familiar with each other. So that'll be good to see you again.
Ben's already voting already.
Sorry, what, Aaron?
Ben's already with his lean voting. He had his thumb up.
Right.
Well, Jose, thank you for coming back and telling us a little bit about what you're up to. And personally, I'm excited to see that you're taking the next steps to moving your photography career to that professional level. So yeah, but don't forget, you have to come back and do presentations when I say, hey.
Of course, yeah. Ask me anytime. I'm always happy to help.
All right, everybody. Next week, Elise Bender will be here to talk about 10 key principles to nature photography. And until next Wednesday, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.